All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour. The protests in Hong Kong are likely to take a turn for the worse if reports are something to go by. Now, the pro-Beijing government in Hong Kong is now mulling the possibility of implementing a state of emergency in the city. Now, the move has, of course, enraged protesters further, with the demonstrations having been planned across the city over the weekend. Now, the implementation of the emergency measures would mean that Carrie Lam can suspend basic rights. She can also censor the media, control public transportation, and can also promulgate any legislation that the government believes is necessary in maintaining public order. It will also mean that the protesters will now be banned from wearing face masks during protests. And once implemented, this would represent a complete violation of China's one country, two systems arrangement, and also will be the tightest of the crackdowns since the protest began almost about 17 weeks back. Now, weekend protests are also expected over the police shooting of a teenager. The Hong Kong government, however, has defended the officer's actions, saying that it had been done in self-defense. All right, now for more on this, we are joined in by our correspondent Grace Lee, who's joining us live from Hong Kong. Good morning to you, Grace. Give us a sense of what is in fact being planned, because there is this possibility of a state of emergency that is likely to be imposed by the administration in Hong Kong. So give us a sense as to how likely is this going to be. All right, there seems to have been a bit of a problem with the connection there. We'll try and get our correspondent Grace Lee back in just a bit, but this is what is unfolding even as we speak in Hong Kong. Remember, the city-state of Hong Kong has been rocked by intense protests over the course of the last 17 weeks. For 17 straight weeks, Hong Kong has been rocked by protests that at times have turned violent, where the pro-democracy protesters have clashed with the police, which on several occasions has denied permission for these protesters to come out onto the streets in such big numbers. But there appears to be a bit of a tipping point that has been reached as a part of these protests. Now, everyone was looking at the 1st of October deadline, because that is the day when China celebrated its National Day, after having become the Communist Republic of China, where it completed 70 years this year. It was expected that the protests may peter out post that, but that is clearly not happening. And now there is a possibility that the administration that is backed by Beijing in Hong Kong may impose a state of emergency. And what this would, of course, mean is that there could be a crackdown on these protesters. One of the reasons as to why the protest has been so successful is the fact that this protest has been leaderless. This protest has been without a face. A lot of these protesters also wear these face masks to protect to remain anonymous. And if the state of emergency were to be imposed, the police would be given sweeping powers. And this has been an extremely contentious sticking point between the protesters and the Hong Kong administration there. Anyway, the protesters want an investigation into the police excesses. Carrie Lam so far has not agreed to that. The protesters also want Carrie Lam to go. They do not want her as the chief executive. That also has not happened so far. But the protest, remember, started off as a reaction against a very controversial extradition bill that had been introduced by Carrie Lam. Now, under that extradition bill, a resident of Hong Kong could have been extradited to China to be tried under Chinese law. And this was one of the reasons as to why this was so controversial. And eventually, after the people took to the streets in such large numbers, the administration in Hong Kong, in what is a rare step, decided to withdraw the controversial extradition bill completely. And now there are other 4 concrete demands which the protesters have put forth. They insist that the one country, two systems compromise that had been struck back in 1997 when Hong Kong was ceded by Britain to China should not be diluted. So this effectively is a fight to try and ensure that the autonomy of Hong Kong is not eroded.